The radio crackled to life at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness of Bagram Airfield like a blade through silk. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Trident 6-1. We are pinned down, taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Grid coordinates follow." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Marcus Reeves, call sign Trident 6-1, leader of a SEAL reconnaissance team that had been dark for the past 18 hours somewhere in the Kunar Province Mountains. In the Tactical Operations Center, every screen flickered with desperate urgency. Red dots pulsed on digital maps while encrypted channels buzzed with chatter from forward operating bases across Afghanistan. The SEALs were trapped in a valley that had become their tomb, surrounded by Taliban fighters who knew every rock, every shadow, every killing field. Air support had been scrambled twice already. F-16s screaming overhead only to report they couldn't get a clean shot without risking friendly fire. Attack helicopters had turned back when surface-to-air missiles lit up their threat detection systems like deadly Christmas trees. Colonel Harrison Matthews stood before the massive tactical display, his weathered face carved from granite and disappointment. 28 years of military service had taught him that some missions end in body bags and folded flags. But not today. Not if he could help it. His eyes swept across the roster of available aircraft, pilots grounded by weather, maintenance issues, or simple mathematics of fuel and distance. Then he stopped. Captain Thalia Reaper Voss sat in the corner of the ready room, methodically checking her flight gear with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a life-saving operation. Her Thunderbolt II, tail number 810964, waited on the tarmac like a sleeping predator, its twin General Electric TF-34 turbofan engines cold but ready to roar. The Warthog, as pilots called it, was built for one purpose: close air support in conditions that would send other aircraft fleeing for safer skies. "Voss," Matthews's voice cut through the tension, "you're up." The room fell silent. Every pilot, crew chief, and operations officer knew Reaper's reputation. They'd heard the whispers, seen the mission reports, watched her land aircraft that should have been scattered across mountainsides in pieces. But this was different. This was a storm that had already claimed 2 attempts, and the enemy below had been preparing for hours. Captain Voss stood slowly, her movements deliberate and calm. She'd earned her call sign 6 months earlier during a mission that had gone sideways faster than physics should allow. When Army Rangers found themselves trapped in a compound outside Kandahar, surrounded by insurgents and running low on ammunition, she put her A-10 into a dive that defied every safety protocol in the book. The GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon had spoken with 7 barrels of absolute authority, each 30 depleted uranium round, finding its target with surgical precision. 23 enemy fighters had been neutralized in a gun run that lasted exactly 47 seconds. Not one friendly casualty. The Rangers had walked out alive, and from that moment forward, every pilot in the squadron knew that when death came calling, Reaper answered back. But respect hadn't come easily for Thalia Voss. In a world dominated by testosterone and tradition, female combat pilots faced skepticism that could prove fatal in split-second decisions. She'd endured the jokes, the doubts, the subtle and not-so-subtle suggestions that maybe she belonged flying cargo runs instead of dancing with enemy fire. Every mission became a test, every success dismissed as luck, every mistake magnified under a microscope that her male counterparts never faced. The storm outside Bagram wasn't just meteorological. It was the perfect metaphor for everything Voss had fought against since earning her wings. Visibility near zero, winds gusting to 40 knots, and enemy forces that had turned a mountain valley into a killing field. Weather reports showed the front wouldn't clear for another 6 hours. By then, Trident 6-1 would be a memory and a casualty report filed in triplicate. She'd grown up in rural Montana, where her father had taught her to hunt elk in conditions that would send city folks scrambling for shelter. "Weather's just another variable, kiddo," he'd say while teaching her to read wind patterns in the way grass bent or snow swirled. Respect it, understand it, but don't let it dictate your choices. Those words had carried her through flight school, through combat training, through every moment when others had suggested she might be more comfortable in a different career field. The A-10 Thunderbolt II represented everything the Air Force had learned about close air support through decades of hard-fought lessons written in blood and determination. Unlike sleek fighters built for speed and altitude, the Warthog was designed to get low, get dirty, and keep flying even when enemies turned the sky into a steel storm of tracers and surface-to-air missiles. Its titanium bathtub protected the pilot, while redundant systems ensured that losing hydraulics, engines, or even chunks of wing wouldn't necessarily mean losing the aircraft. But tonight's mission would push even the legendary Warthog beyond its design parameters. The weather front rolling across the Hindu Kush Mountains carried the kind of turbulence that could tear aircraft apart, while the enemy below had spent hours preparing for exactly this scenario. They knew air support would come eventually, and they'd positioned themselves accordingly. Machine gun nests covered every approach, RPG teams waited in concealed positions, and somewhere in the darkness, shoulder-fired missiles tracked on thermal signatures. As Voss walked toward her aircraft, the tarmac gleamed with ice that made every step treacherous. Ground crews moved like ghosts through the swirling snow, their flashlights cutting weak beams through the darkness. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, her crew chief, stood beside the A-10 with the protective stance of a father watching his daughter head into danger. They'd worked together for 8 months, and he knew her pre-flight routine better than his own morning coffee ritual. "She's fully loaded, Captain," Rodriguez said, his voice barely audible above the wind. "GAU-8 has 1,100 rounds of 30mm mixed ball and armor-piercing. You've got 4 AGM-65 Mavericks, 2,000-pound JDAMs, and enough fuel for 3 hours on station." He paused, studying her face in the red glow of the aircraft's position lights. "Weather's getting worse, ma'am. You sure about this?" Voss smiled, the expression barely visible beneath her helmet's visor. "Chief, I've been sure about a lot of things that turned out wrong, but those boys down there don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect conditions." She began her walk-around inspection, hands moving with practiced efficiency over control surfaces, weapons pylons, and engine intakes. Every rivet, every panel, every system had to be perfect because there would be no second chances in the mountains ahead. The storm wasn't just challenging, it was actively hostile, as if nature itself had joined forces with the Taliban to claim more American lives. Satellite imagery showed the weather front stretching for hundreds of miles, a wall of violence that would test every system on her aircraft. But buried in the meteorological data was something others had missed. A brief window, lasting perhaps 20 minutes, when wind shear would decrease just enough to make the impossible merely suicidal. Colonel Matthews appeared beside her aircraft, his expression grave. "Reaper, I need you to understand something. This isn't a standard CAS mission. Intelligence suggests the enemy has been expecting our response and has prepared accordingly. You'll be flying into a trap designed specifically for close air support aircraft." He handed her a sealed envelope containing the latest intelligence updates. "If you have any doubts, any at all, I need to know now." She tucked the envelope into her flight suit without opening it. "Sir, those SEALs trusted their government to have their backs when things went sideways. Right now, I'm that government. Doubts are a luxury I can't afford." Her words carried the quiet confidence of someone who had already made peace with whatever consequences lay ahead. In the distance, another radio transmission crackled from the trapped SEAL team, voices tight with controlled desperation as enemy fire intensified. The pre-flight briefing had been unusually detailed, filled with contingencies and abort criteria that everyone hoped wouldn't be necessary. Intelligence officers had outlined enemy positions with the precision of surgeons mapping a tumor, while weather specialists had painted a picture of atmospheric chaos that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. But beneath all the technical data lay a simple truth. American soldiers were dying, and someone had to do something about it. As Voss climbed into her cockpit, the familiar embrace of switches, displays, and controls felt like coming home after a long journey. Her hands moved through the startup checklist with the fluidity of muscle memory, each action precise and deliberate. The twin TF-34 engines wound up with a rising whine that cut through the storm's howl, and suddenly the aircraft was alive beneath her, ready to carry death and salvation into the mountains where heroes and enemies waited in the darkness. Ground Control Tower's voice crackled through her headset. "Reaper 27, you are cleared for takeoff. Winds are gusting 40 knots, visibility quarter-mile in snow. Good hunting." The words carried more weight than usual, laden with the knowledge that this mission would either end in triumph or tragedy, with very little middle ground between the two extremes. She advanced the throttles, and the A-10 began its roll down the icy runway, gathering speed despite the crosswinds that tried to push her into the darkness. At rotation speed, she pulled back on the stick, and the Warthog lifted into the storm with the determination of a bird of prey ascending to hunt. Behind her, Bagram Airfield disappeared into the swirling snow, while ahead lay mountains filled with enemies who had been preparing for this moment since sunset. The flight to the target area would take 38 minutes through weather that violated every safety protocol in the book. But somewhere below, American warriors were counting down their remaining ammunition, while enemy forces closed in for the kill. Time had become the most precious commodity on Earth, and Captain Thalia, Reaper, Voss was about to spend it all in one desperate gamble against impossible odds. Radio chatter filled the airwaves as various command elements tracked her progress toward the mountains. Forward air controllers updated target coordinates, intelligence officers relayed real-time enemy movements, and medical evacuation crews prepared for multiple casualty scenarios. Everyone understood that the next hour would determine whether Trident 61 came home as heroes or statistics, and the responsibility for that outcome now rested in the hands of a pilot whom many had initially underestimated. The A-10 climbed through layers of turbulence that would have grounded commercial aviation indefinitely. Ice formed on the wings faster than the de-icing systems could clear it, while wind shear numbers reached levels that existed more in theory than practical experience. But the Warthog had been designed by engineers who understood that close air support meant flying in conditions that sensible people avoided, and tonight it would prove whether their calculations had been sufficient. Voss checked her navigation systems against known landmarks, though the storm had reduced visibility to nearly zero. GPS coordinates became her lifeline to the world below, while radar altimeter readings told her exactly how close she was flying to mountains that could appear without warning. The cockpit became her universe, filled with glowing displays and constant radio chatter from forces that were depending on her to turn the tide of a battle that had been going badly for hours. "Reaper 27, this is Overlord. We're showing you 15 minutes out from target area. Be advised, enemy activity has increased significantly in the past 10 minutes. They know something's coming." The voice belonged to an Air Force controller whose job was to coordinate the complex dance of aircraft, ground forces, and enemy movements that defined modern combat. His words carried an undertone of concern that experienced pilots learned to recognize and respect. She acknowledged the transmission while running through her attack profile one final time. The GAU-8 cannon beneath her aircraft held enough firepower to level city blocks, but success would depend on precision rather than destruction. The SEALs were trapped in a valley barely 200 meters wide, surrounded by enemy positions that had been carefully chosen for their overlapping fields of fire. One mistake, one moment of imprecision, and she'd be dropping ordnance on the very people she was trying to save. The storm began to show its true nature as she approached the mountain range, with turbulence that made the aircraft buck and roll like an angry horse. Ice crystals streaked past her canopy in horizontal lines that spoke of wind speeds approaching the limits of what even the A-10 could handle. But buried in the chaos was that brief window of opportunity that satellite data had promised. 20 minutes when the impossible might become merely improbable. Her radar warning receiver remained silent, which meant enemy surface-to-air missiles hadn't yet acquired her position. But that would change quickly once she descended into the valley where Trident 6-1 waited for salvation or death. The Taliban fighters below had learned hard lessons about American close air support over the past decade, and they would be ready with everything from small arms fire to sophisticated missile systems that could turn her aircraft into burning wreckage scattered across the mountainside. Colonel Matthews's voice cut through the static. "Reaper, we've lost radio contact with Trident 6-1 as of 3 minutes ago. Their last transmission indicated they were down to less than 20% ammunition and had taken casualties. Whatever you're going to do, it needs to happen now." The words hit her like a physical blow, adding urgency to an already impossible mission profile that was now racing against a clock measured in heartbeats rather than minutes. She pushed the throttles forward, coaxing every available knot of airspeed from engines that were already operating at their maximum sustainable power settings. The A-10 responded with the eagerness of a weapons system designed for exactly this type of mission, where speed mattered less than the ability to arrive when needed most. Behind her, other aircraft had been launched as backup, but they were still 40 minutes away from a fight that would be decided in the next 10. The mountains rose around her like the walls of a cathedral built for violence, their peaks disappearing into storm clouds that flickered with lightning. Navigation became a matter of threading between granite monuments, while maintaining enough altitude to avoid controlled flight into terrain. Her hands stayed light on the controls, letting the aircraft tell her what it needed rather than fighting against conditions that were already pushing both pilot and machine to their absolute limits. "All stations, this is Reaper 2-7. I have visual on the target area." The lie came easily, born from a pilot's instinct to project confidence even when surrounded by uncertainty. She couldn't see anything beyond her instruments and the occasional lightning flash that revealed mountain peaks entirely too close for comfort. But the GPS coordinates showed her exactly where Trident 6-1 was fighting for their lives, and that would have to be enough. The radio crackled with a new voice, weak, static-filled, but unmistakably American. Any station, this is Trident 6-1. We are in deep shit down here and could really use some help." Lieutenant Commander Reeves sounded like a man who had already made peace with his mortality, but wasn't quite ready to accept it. His words carried the particular brand of calm desperation that came from professional warriors facing their final engagement. Voss keyed her microphone. "Trident 6-1, this is Reaper 2-7, A-10 inbound for close air support. I need you to mark your position with infrared strobes and give me target coordinates for the bad guys." Her voice carried the steady confidence of someone who had done this before, though never under conditions that combined the worst possible weather with an enemy that had been preparing for hours to kill anything that flew into their valley. The response came immediately. "Reaper 2-7, you are the most beautiful sound I've heard all day. We have IR strobes active, and I'm about to paint targets with our designator. Be advised, we are in a world of hurt down here, and you're going to be flying into a steel storm. They've been waiting for air support and have everything from small arms to what looks like a Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun positioned to cover our location." She switched her targeting system to infrared and began her descent into hell, leaving the relative safety of altitude for the killing field below. Through the storm, she could just barely make out the strobes marking friendly positions, tiny pinpricks of light surrounded by muzzle flashes that told the story of a desperate last stand. The SEALs had chosen their defensive position well, with natural rock formations providing some protection, but they were clearly outnumbered and outgunned by enemies who knew every inch of the terrain. "Tally-ho on your strobes, Trident 6-1. I'm beginning my attack run now. Keep your heads down and trust the process." The words came from years of training and experience, but tonight they carried extra weight because failure meant that good men would die while she flew home to explain why her best hadn't been enough. She rolled inverted and pulled the nose down, diving toward the valley floor where tracers and explosions painted abstract art against the darkness. The world transformed into a kaleidoscope of violence as she entered the engagement envelope. Tracers streaked past her canopy in colors that ranged from green to orange to white, each one representing someone's attempt to kill her before she could complete her mission. The A-10 shuddered as small arms fire found its mark, but the titanium bathtub surrounding her held firm, while redundant systems kept critical functions operating despite the damage accumulating across her aircraft's structure. Her targeting computer locked onto the first enemy position, a machine gun nest that had been pouring fire into the SEAL's defensive perimeter for the past 2 hours. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon beneath her feet spoke with authority that transcended language barriers, sending 30mm depleted uranium rounds downrange at a rate of 65 per second. The enemy position simply ceased to exist, replaced by smoke and silence that spoke louder than any explosion. Good hits, Reaper. You just eliminated their primary machine gun position. I'm marking the next target now. Lieutenant Commander Reeves's voice carried new hope mixed with professional appreciation for precision firepower delivered exactly where needed. The SEAL team's laser designator painted another enemy position. This one, a mortar crew that had been dropping rounds uncomfortably close to their defensive perimeter. But the Taliban fighters weren't passive targets waiting for elimination. They'd learned from years of fighting American air power and had prepared accordingly. Surface-to-air missiles began tracking her heat signature, while the Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun opened fire with streams of 23 rounds that could tear her A-10 apart if they found their mark. She pulled into a climbing turn that stressed the aircraft's frame, while chaff and flares bloomed behind her like deadly flowers. The storm that had made her approach so treacherous now became an ally, obscuring her aircraft's signature and confusing targeting systems that relied on clear lines of sight. She used the weather as concealment, diving in and out of cloud layers, while enemy gunners tried to track a target that appeared and disappeared like a ghost made of titanium and determination. Each attack run required threading between mountain peaks, while avoiding enemy fire that grew more accurate with each pass. Reaper 2-7, be advised you have SA-7 missiles in the air, 2 launches from your 6 o'clock position. The warning came from an electronic warfare aircraft orbiting safely above the weather, its sensors tracking the infrared signatures of shoulder-fired missiles that were designed specifically to kill low-flying aircraft. She immediately began evasive maneuvers that pushed both pilot and aircraft to their limits, pulling G-forces that made her vision tunnel, while the missiles exploded harmlessly behind her. Her second gun run eliminated the mortar position with the same precision as the first, but the cost was becoming apparent. Warning lights illuminated across her instrument panel, indicating damage to hydraulic systems, electrical components, and structural elements that were essential for flight safety. The A-10 was living up to its reputation for survivability, but even the legendary Warthog had limits that were being tested with each passing minute. Trident 6-1, I count 4 enemy positions remaining, but I'm taking significant damage up here. How much longer can you hold your position? She needed honest assessment rather than false bravado, because the mathematics of combat were becoming increasingly unfavorable. Her aircraft could probably survive 2 more attack runs before accumulated damage forced her to abort the mission or risk losing the aircraft entirely. Reaper, we can hold for maybe 10 more minutes, but that's pushing it. We've got wounded who need immediate medical attention, and our ammunition situation is becoming critical. Whatever you're going to do, please do it fast. The SEAL commander's words carried the weight of responsibility for 12 lives that depended entirely on her ability to eliminate threats faster than they could eliminate her. She rolled into her third attack run with the knowledge that precision had become even more critical. The remaining enemy positions were closer to friendly forces, requiring her to place ordnance within meters of American positions, while flying through weather that made visual identification nearly impossible. Her targeting systems became extensions of her will, guided by coordinates painted by laser designators operated by men who trusted her completely. The GAU-8 cannon spoke again, its voice now familiar and comforting in the chaos of combat. Another enemy position disappeared in smoke and flame, but return fire was immediate and accurate. Something major struck her aircraft's right engine, causing a significant vibration that spoke of catastrophic damage to turbine blades or bearing assemblies. She shut down the damaged engine and continued flying on single-engine power, knowing that her margin for error had just decreased to nearly zero. Good hits on target 3, Reaper. One more position and we can extract from this mess. Lieutenant Commander Reeves's voice carried exhaustion mixed with hope, the emotional cocktail of warriors who could see survival just beyond the next few minutes. But those minutes would require her to make one final attack run against an enemy position that was now fully alert and tracking her approach with weapons designed specifically to kill aircraft. The final target was the most dangerous, a position that commanded the entire valley and had been saving its ammunition for exactly this moment. As she rolled into her attack run, every weapon in the valley opened fire simultaneously, creating a wall of steel that seemed impossible to penetrate. Her aircraft shuddered and bucked as rounds found their mark, but she held steady on the target coordinates while her cannon prepared to speak one final time. Time dilated in the way it always did during moments of absolute commitment, each second stretching into an eternity filled with decisions that would determine whether she lived or died. The target grew larger in her sights while tracers streaked past her canopy close enough to count. Her finger found the trigger, and the GAU-8 Avenger delivered its judgment with the finality of divine intervention. The last enemy position ceased to exist, replaced by silence that felt like a prayer answered. All targets destroyed, Trident 6-1. The valley is clear for your extraction. Medical evacuation helicopters are inbound to your position. Her words carried the satisfaction of a mission accomplished against impossible odds, though the cost was becoming increasingly apparent. Warning lights painted her cockpit in shades of red and amber that spoke of systems failing faster than backup procedures could compensate. But she'd done it. 12 American warriors would go home to their families because she'd been willing to fly into a storm that sensible people avoided, engage enemies who had been preparing for hours to kill her, and place precision ordnance within meters of friendly forces, while flying a damaged aircraft through weather that violated every safety regulation ever written. The mathematics of heroism had been calculated in 30mm rounds and measured in lives saved. The flight back to Bagram would test her piloting skills as severely as the combat mission had tested her courage. Single-engine flight in severe weather, with multiple system failures and structural damage, required flying techniques that existed more in emergency procedures than practical experience. But the A-10 Thunderbolt II had been designed by engineers who understood that close air support meant bringing damaged aircraft home, and tonight it would prove their calculations one more time. As she climbed away from the valley that had nearly become her grave, radio traffic exploded with congratulations and status reports. Trident 6-1 confirmed all personnel alive and accounted for, with medical evacuation helicopters already inbound to extract wounded warriors who would live to fight another day. Forward air controllers reported complete elimination of enemy positions, while intelligence analysts began assessing the tactical implications of a perfectly executed close air support mission. But for Captain Thalia, Reaper Voss, the mission wouldn't be complete until her damaged A-10 was safely on the ground at Bagram Airfield. Single-engine flight through a mountain storm, with hydraulic systems failing and electrical components shorting out from battle damage, would require every ounce of skill she'd accumulated through years of training and experience. The aircraft responded to her inputs with the reluctance of a machine pushed beyond its design limits, but it responded nonetheless. Bagram Tower, this is Reaper 27 declaring an emergency. I'm inbound single-engine with battle damage and requesting priority handling for straighten approach. Her voice remained calm and professional despite the cascade of warning lights that painted her cockpit in urgent reds and ambers. Emergency procedures became her lifeline to survival, each checklist item a stepping stone across the gap between life and death. The response was immediate. Reaper 27, you are cleared for emergency approach runway 27. Emergency crews are standing by. We have you on radar and will provide continuous guidance to touchdown. The air traffic controller's voice carried the particular blend of professionalism and concern reserved for pilots bringing home damaged aircraft filled with heroes who had exceeded every reasonable expectation. Her approach to Bagram required constant adjustments for wind, weather, and aircraft systems that were failing faster than she could compensate. The single remaining engine provided barely enough power to maintain controlled flight, while damaged control surfaces made every input an exercise in applied physics rather than standard procedure. But she'd practiced these scenarios thousands of times in simulators, and muscle memory guided her through procedures that had to be executed perfectly on the first attempt. The runway lights appeared through the storm like salvation made visible, a ribbon of guidance that led towards safety and survival. She configured the aircraft for landing with the knowledge that her damaged systems might not provide the performance margins normally available during single-engine approaches. Every decision carried consequences that would determine whether she walked away from this landing or became another casualty statistic in the endless mathematics of war. Touchdown came with the particular satisfaction reserved for landings that represented triumph over circumstances that should have proven fatal. They rolled down the runway with emergency vehicles pursuing like a parade of flashing lights and professional concern. As she taxied clear of the active runway, ground crews swarmed her aircraft to assess damage that told the story of a mission accomplished against impossible odds. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez was the first person she saw after shutting down her remaining engine, his face a mixture of relief and professional assessment of aircraft damage. "Captain, I don't know how you got this bird back on the ground. We've got holes in places that shouldn't have holes and systems that should have failed 10 minutes ago." His words carried the particular brand of admiration that experienced maintenance professionals, reserved for pilots who brought home aircraft that defied probability. She climbed down from her cockpit with legs that barely supported her weight, adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion that reached into her bones. The mission had lasted exactly 2 hours and 37 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime measured in heartbeats and decisions that had determined whether 12 American warriors lived or died. The scoreboard was simple: 12 lives saved, 0 friendly casualties, and 1 A-10 that would require extensive repairs before flying again. Colonel Matthews appeared beside her aircraft, his expression carrying the particular combination of relief and pride reserved for commanding officers whose people had exceeded every reasonable expectation. "Outstanding work, Captain. Trident 6-1 is safely extracted, and preliminary reports indicate you eliminated every enemy position in that valley. The SEALs wanted me to pass along their personal thanks for keeping them alive long enough for extraction." But the congratulations felt premature to Voss, who understood that successful missions were measured in lives saved rather than targets destroyed. Somewhere in military hospitals, medics would be treating wounded warriors who would recover because she'd been willing to fly into conditions that violated every safety protocol ever written. That mathematics mattered more than any commendation or recognition that might follow from tonight's events. The storm that had made her mission so treacherous was finally beginning to clear, revealing mountain peaks that had been invisible during her approach to target. Looking back toward the valley where Trident 6-1 had faced annihilation, she could see search and rescue helicopters extracting the SEAL team that had trusted their lives to her precision and determination. The sight carried emotional weight that no amount of training could fully prepare pilots to handle. Intelligence officers would spend weeks analyzing every aspect of tonight's mission, looking for lessons that could be applied to future operations where American lives hung in the balance. But the most important lesson was already clear. When properly trained and equipped warriors faced impossible odds with determination and skill, the impossible became merely improbable. Captain Thalia, Reaper, Voss had proven that lesson with 30mm rounds and single-engine flight through mountain storms. As ground crews began assessing the full extent of battle damage to her A-10, it became clear that she'd been flying a machine that should have been scattered across the mountainside in pieces. Holes punctured hydraulic lines, electrical systems, and control surfaces that were essential for flight safety. But the Warthog's legendary survivability had been proven once again, bringing both pilot and aircraft home despite damage that would have destroyed most other aircraft types. The debriefing would come later, filled with technical analysis and tactical assessments that would be studied by future generations of close air support pilots. But the real story was simpler. When American warriors needed help, someone had answered the call with precision ordnance delivered exactly where needed despite weather and enemy action that should have made success impossible. The mathematics of heroism had been calculated in lives saved rather than targets destroyed. Radio traffic continued to fill the airwaves with status reports and congratulations from units across Afghanistan who had monitored the mission. Forward air controllers reported complete elimination of enemy positions. Intelligence analysts confirmed the tactical success of the operation, and medical units reported that all extracted personnel were receiving appropriate care. But the most important transmission was the simplest. Trident 6-1 sends their thanks for bringing them home. In the hours that followed, word of the mission would spread through the close-knit community of close air support pilots like wildfire through dry grass. The story would grow and change with each telling, but the essential facts would remain constant. One pilot, one aircraft, impossible conditions, and 12 lives saved through precision and determination that exceeded every reasonable expectation. Captain Thalia, Reaper, Voss had earned her call sign through previous missions, but tonight she'd proven that reputation was just another word for consistent excellence under pressure. The damaged A-10 would spend weeks in maintenance hangars, while technicians rebuilt systems and replaced components that had been pushed beyond their design limits. But the aircraft had fulfilled its primary mission, providing close air support when American lives hung in the balance. The Warthog's designers had understood that survivability mattered more than speed, that precision was more valuable than stealth, and that bringing pilots home was just as important as delivering ordnance on target. As the immediate aftermath of the mission gave way to routine post-flight procedures, the magnitude of what had been accomplished began to settle into the consciousness of everyone who had witnessed or participated in the operation. 12 American warriors would see another sunrise because one pilot had been willing to fly into conditions that should have proven fatal. The mathematics were simple, but the execution had required skills and determination that existed at the absolute pinnacle of military aviation. The storm was clearing, revealing stars that had been hidden behind clouds filled with violence and uncertainty. But in a valley 40 miles away, American warriors were being loaded onto medical evacuation helicopters that would carry them to safety, an eventual reunion with families who would never know how close they'd come to receiving folded flags instead of living heroes. That knowledge would remain forever classified, buried in mission reports that few would ever read but many would remember. Captain Thalia, Reaper, Voss had entered the storm as a competent pilot with something to prove. She emerged as a legend whose actions would be studied by future generations of warriors who might face similar impossible odds. The transition had been measured in 30mm rounds and single-engine flight through weather that violated every safety regulation. But the result was simple: 12 lives saved, and one reputation forged in titanium and determination that exceeded every reasonable expectation for what one person could accomplish when American lives hung in the balance.